Well, it's time now to speak to the government, and this morning we're joined by the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, as you can see. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for talking to us. I want to start by asking you about Zara Sultana, the suspended Labour MP, who announced last night that she and Jeremy Corbyn are going to co-lead a new party. She's been pretty damning in her assessment of the Labour government. She says Labour's failing to improve people's lives. She says poverty is growing and inequality is obscene. That is pretty damning from one of your own, isn't it?
Well, I just strongly disagree with her. You're right, 1 year on from the Labour government being elected, and as the Prime Minister said a year ago, the change doesn't happen at the flick of a switch, but it starts straight away. And look at the things that we've been doing this week, announcing a 10-year plan for our National Health Service, the thing that is the foundation for so many of us right across the country, where we've already seen waiting times coming down, we've already seen 4 million more appointments. Today, we're announcing that the 3,000 additional neighbourhood police on our streets this year will be focusing on town centres, a real blitz on town centre crime this summer. Again, there are things that really matter in communities, and your report just talked about the action that we're taking to help leaseholders. We're strengthening renters' rights. So across the board, that is about support for working people. And on the specific issue you talked about child poverty, extending free school meals to 500,000 children. These are real changes, have a real impact on people's lives.
So clearly there are things that you feel proud of one year in, but it's clear that not all your MPs agree. I mean, just this week, 49 Labour MPs rebelled, even after you ditched a lot of your flagship welfare bill. So Zara Sultana isn't alone, is she? There seem to be a lot of Labour MPs who have lost faith in the leadership.
Well, I think she's always taken a very different view to most people in the government on a lot of different things, and that's for her to do so. I think, though, the real question is the things that people want to see change in the country. I think my constituency, the thing that came up most than anything else was the state of our NHS. People really worried about not being able to get appointments and feeling that the NHS was crumbling around our ears. Instead, we have a Labour government that is rebuilding our NHS again, that is strengthening town centres with the safer streets work that we're doing.
But I do want to press you on what this rebellion means for the party, because you should be having a celebration, but this week, one of your flagship policies, this welfare reform bill, has faced this huge rebellion. You've had a humiliating climb down by the government. If Labour can't unite on a core policy like this, what does it say about your ability to govern?
Well, there's a lot of things that actually everybody has focused on, about the importance of reforming to get people back into work, about the importance of making sure that the welfare system isn't getting people trapped, getting people stuck, because the best way of getting people out of poverty is to get people into work.
But what about this issue of people rebelling?
You're right, of course. There were disagreements, and including about the process of reviewing the personal independence payment. That has now been changed, and there's now going to be a much slower time review to take place in order to get that right. And look, the Prime Minister's reflected on this process, and we know government is not smooth. You know, I've been in government before, under the last Labour government, before 2010, been in opposition and been in government again. Of course, there are times in government when things aren't smooth and when you have to do a lot more work to get things right. But overall, especially things like getting the economy growing with the 3 trade deals that we've got, wages growing, the NHS and policing, a lot of things that are going to take longer, but still also the work that's really important that's underway.
But as far as this bill is concerned, you did have to backtrack. You said it's not always smooth, but it became expensive when you do that. You now have £5 billion to find. The Prime Minister and the Chancellor have refused to rule out tax rises. A tax rise is now inevitable.
Well, all of those issues are matters for the Chancellor and the budget, and they have to take those sort of decisions around budgets. I know from very long periods of time spending in different cabinets through the years, ultimately it's only for the Chancellor to make those kinds of decisions. What we are doing, though, is making sure that we're investing in growing the economy, because that is our best way to help get everybody better off and also to improve our public services.
But you can't sit here and rule out tax rises, can you?
Well, I wouldn't write a budget budget because I'm the Home Secretary. So that is a matter for the Chancellor, and it wouldn't be right for me to do that.
I want to ask you about migration as Home Secretary. Nearly 20,000 asylum seekers have arrived in Britain on small boats so far in 2025. That's a record high for the first 6 months of the year, 50% rise on the year before. Your plan to smash the gangs doesn't seem to be working.
Well, small boats is a very serious problem, and no one should be making that journey. It undermines our border security and puts lives at risk. We've been building a new infrastructure on law enforcement, the Border Security Command in the UK, and also new agreements with other European countries and other international countries to strengthen that law enforcement against the gangs, because it hasn't been strong enough previously. It really hasn't. But one of the most important things that's been happening is you've got the way the gangs are operating now is they take advantage of the fact that the French rules won't allow French police to intervene in French waters. We've seen these just appalling scenes of people just standing in the water, climbing into the boats, French police unable to do anything about it. So one of the things I've been working very closely with the French Interior Minister on, and he and I agree, those French rules need to change. The French need to be able to intervene in French waters. I want to see that happen as rapidly as possible, because that is crucial to preventing those boats crossing in the first place.
So how soon are we going to see the numbers come down?
I want to see that happen. I want to see that, no one should be making these crossings at all. I want to see these rules change in France as swiftly as possible. They have to go through different steps in order to make that happen, but we are working very closely with them on this.
There have been reports that Britain could send back everyone who arrives in a small boat in return for an equal number of asylum seekers being taken into the UK who have connections to the UK. Is that a scheme that you're looking at?
Well, we've been looking at a range of different issues, the different ways of working, not just with France, but with other European countries, other countries like Iraq, countries where we know we've seen these networks of criminal gangs operating. We're looking at areas around the law enforcement that I talked about, some new strengthened processes for law enforcement, strengthening border security itself, and that's the measures along the channel, particularly in French waters, and also looking at strengthening returns. We're looking at different ways of doing returns. Since the election, 30,000 people have been returned who have no right to be in the UK, and that's nearly 30% increase in enforced returns as well, because the rules need to be respected and enforced. So we are looking at different ways of strengthening returns, but that is there's a lot of work underway on that.
This week, MPs voted to prescribe Palestine Action as a terrorist organisation. Some MPs are uncomfortable about that. They call it a draconian overreach, and they've raised concerns that it could risk criminalising legitimate protest. Is it an appropriate use of anti-terror powers?
Well, we go through a serious statutory process, and based on security assessments and advice in these processes. And what you have here is a group that has been repeatedly violent. We've seen a series of different incidents. We've obviously seen the incident at Brize Norton, where aircrafts were involved in our armed forces. That obviously is now a matter for the courts, because charges have been laid, and so we can't discuss that further. But there have been a series of violent incidents, and that do end up affecting our national security. We have to make this clear. This is very separate from the right to protest. People can raise protests, and also from the issue that people are very concerned about the really intolerable events in Gaza and in the West Bank, where people want to express strong concern. But that is different from the actions of a group that affect our national security.
And I wonder if I can ask you just very briefly, I want to let you go, but I did want to ask you about Rachel Reeves, who was out yesterday putting a brave face on it after a difficult week and emotional PMQs. You've sat on the front benches for years. How hard is it to have a bad day at the office and be in the public eye?
Well, I think Rachel said herself yesterday, it's, lots of people have bad days and she had personal matters, to deal with. But, for her to be dealing with a bad day, you end up on the telly. And that is a different circumstance for politicians to be in. And all of us have bad days at work. All of us have days when there are different things going on, and it is slightly different when you're under such media scrutiny. But the thing about Rachel is I think she is one of the strongest and most determined people I know, and you saw her just carrying on getting on with the incredibly important things that she's doing, working on trade, on the economy, and on getting the investment we need.
And finally, you want to talk about safer streets today,
yeah.
and the money that's going into policing in local communities. What exactly is changing?
Well, we're getting 3,000 additional neighbourhood police onto our streets this year. What we're setting out now is a plan to focus them particularly on town centres this summer. 500 towns and high streets across the country have signed up to be part of the Safer Streets Summer Initiative, and that will be targeting things like shoplifting, persistent antisocial behaviour, street theft, a lot of crimes that I think have really not been taken seriously for far too long, treated as low level, but at the very heart of our community. Our town centres need to be safe. Shoppers need to feel safe. Traders, business people, shop workers need to feel safe so that our town centres can thrive. That's why we need the neighbourhood police back on the beat in our town centres, stronger enforcement and stronger prevention to keep our town centres safe.